Hi, how are you all? I'm Robert Smith, still Robert Smith, and this is the third one in the series of leading, and this is leading through solution-focused coaching. We've already spoken about the changing world and the changing world that you need to lead in on the first one. The second one we spoke about influencing people, building rapport, being able to change people, inspire them, lead them by understanding how people tick and how to communicate more effectively with people. Now, if you're doing that, which I know you will be by now, in the next stages, people are going to ask you to coach them. Because people will, if they know that you understand about them, understand how they tick, they'll want more help and assistance, which is absolutely vital if you're going to be a leader, to be able to coach people. For two reasons at least. Firstly, if you teach people specifically talking about solution-focused coaching, what it does is it takes the pressure off you, because you're not having to come up with solutions, you're helping the person that you're leading to come up with solutions. And in that process, you're also teaching the person that you're leading to come up with the solution. So eventually they can do their own coaching, their own thinking about getting the solutions that they need, the organization needs, and so on. So it's a very powerful tool to the skills that you need as a leader. So let's say a little bit more about some frames about coaching. So we've already spoken on the first DVD about the old timeless wisdom and the new wisdom. Let me just recap those, if I may. The old wisdom, we spoke about how our thinking eventually turns into the personality, the character you are. But what you're thinking actually affects the words you use. That becomes, in its turn, it becomes the habits. The habits create your character, and your character eventually creates your destiny and who you are and the way you behave. You need to explain that when you're coaching somebody right at the beginning, that is a natural process, has been going on since the beginning of time. Likewise, as inside as outside, this notion that whatever we're thinking about manifests in the world, because what you're concentrating on is invariably there. Now, there were some examples I gave you on that original DVD that you can use to explain to whoever you're coaching. So that's important, along with those natural laws that go with leadership. Because anybody that's being coached is in the frame for being a leader, to understand the idea that trustworthiness, integrity, honesty, openness should be absolutely a foundation to that person in the way that they think. Then the other one that we spoke about before was the new wisdom, how the world has changed so rapidly over the last few years that what we were all worried about a year ago has gone by. Actually, probably even, what we were worried about last month is not what we're worrying about this month. And eventually it'll be what we're worried about today, isn't the thing that we were worrying about yesterday, because it's all moving along so quickly. So this thing about coaching is being able to keep people up to date, keep their thinking up to date. So we've spoken about those first two, and if you need to go and refresh yourself, go back to the original DVD and have a look at that in some more detail. Some of the other things that are important to explain before you get involved in coaching with whoever you're talking to is the very notion of cause and effect. We are all aware of the idea of cause and effect. One thing causes another thing. The question we should always be asking is, are you at cause or are you at effect? The job of the coach, or the job of the leader in this context, is to get the person to, as much as possible, to cause. And that is that they are making things happen rather than allowing things to happen to them. Because the difference between cause and effect is, at cause you get results. If you're at effect, you've always got excuses why things didn't turn out. Now, the thing that strikes me is many of us spend our lives doing things based on other people's ideas, other people's programming of you. So, for instance, with me, I discovered that about the age of 30, that actually it wasn't me driving the bus down the highway of life. It was my mother, my father, my uncles, my school teachers, my extended family. All these people were the people that were driving the bus. It wasn't me. And it was a conscious decision on my behalf, was to completely reroute my life with me driving the bus, being a cause, making sure that I did what I wanted to do, rather than being constantly up until that stage at effect. I was constantly thinking the way that I'd been programmed by my background. Now, I can't say that I'm at cause all the time. However, I can assume the mantle of being at cause. Let me give you an example of this. Now, I worked for many years, actually 25 years in the UK with a partner, Leslie. And Leslie and I worked passionately together. And it worked so well. We were a great team, a great training team. And occasionally we would really go, and we were always arguing from the point of view of getting the best from the client. But because she might see it one way and I might see it another way. Well, we used to work it out. But occasionally, we had this situation where she would say, and this is what the client wants, so we've got to do it that way. Now, I could easily go, well, okay, that's not the way I think it should be done. So I could easily slip into effect and go, well, if it doesn't work, it's not my fault. But I was aware of that and would consciously go, okay, the decision has been made. This is a group decision. The group decision overrides my decision. Therefore, I am at cause and I will make this work. So I will keep my attitude towards the project at cause rather than at effect, which gives you an awful lot more motivation because you are driving it rather than being driven. The interesting thing with that is, because you are at cause and your mind, body are all part of the same system, part of the same connection, and if you remember the little test we did in the communication DVD, you remember the arm test and how, thinking about depression, the guy his arm lost its strength. If you are at cause and you are driving what's going on, then of course you're going to have a lot more energy and you'll be able to think straighter. You will have a lot more flexibility because it's all joined up. In fact, to a level that we have 10 to the power of 11, 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 11 neurological links in our body. Now, what the hell is that number? That number is about the equivalent of the stars in the universe. So we are a very complex piece of machinery, if you like. And we have infinite power, which we're barely tapped into. I think Yale estimated that we use around about 3% of our potential brain power, which if you think about it, what's the rest for? Well, it's kind of ready for development, I think. So we have an enormous amount of reserves in our computing power that is we're barely tapped into it. And the other thing that's important to explain in the coaching process, this is all really just setting the frame if you're going to talk to somebody about coaching. The other thing is that energy flows where your attention goes. Wherever you put your attention, that's where the energy will flow. The only question is, where do you put the energy? And it's a little bit like we're a light bulb. Are we a light bulb? What happens is we maybe light up the room, but if you take that same amount of energy and you put it into a laser beam, it will go through steel that's that thick. So the thing with being aware of where your energy is going is make sure you direct all the energy to the direction you want to go, and that gives you a massive amount of thrust to do things and get things done. So now that's the idea of the frames, if you like, the kind of picture around it. So when people come and say, well, can I have some coaching? You kind of need to explain these things to people before you get into doing a coaching session. And this is the magic formula for coaching. So a person's performance, which is the first P, is equal to their potential less any internal interference plus any external influence. And what we're doing is looking at the internal and external interference and finding ways to remove that, so a person's potential and the person's performance get as close as possible, because people always have far more potential than they ever imagine. And in fact, no matter what you think you are always more than that. And in always more than that. So let's have a look at what coaching isn't. Again, this is one of these things that you would need to explain to somebody that's asking for coaching. The difference. It is not mentoring. The fundamental differences between coaching and mentoring is the expert, and you may well be the expert in the organization, but as the expert there is that higher position, and the person who is being mentored is in a lower position, and you are giving them the wisdom of your experience, which works perfectly well as a tool of leadership on its own. But the balance of power goes with the mentor. The balance of power with coaching is it's an even team, and what the job of the coach is to get the other person to find their own solutions. With the mentor gives the solutions. Counseling and therapy probably fit into the same category, and I always think the easiest way of describing that, if I may, is to imagine a line which is just a line of normal behavior, normal functioning human being is at this line. And the job of counseling and therapy is to bring people up to the normal functioning line. The idea of coaching is taking people beyond the normal functioning line. So it's actually, everybody's getting better, but people that are being coached are working on the level of getting better than the norm. So interestingly enough, I've got a couple of friends who are psychiatrists who work on the notion that they help people normalize their illnesses, psychological illnesses, with drugs, and rather than give them therapy, they give them coaching about how to succeed in life rather than how to keep going over their past. Apparently with some success, and they're now piloting it with the British National Health Service. So that's what coaching is and isn't. Okay, let's have a look at the 9 steps that are involved in a coaching process. And as you remember, that we can deal with 5 to 9 pieces of information. We're on the edge of what people can cope with here, but we're going to break them down into blocks of 3. So to start off with, you're going to build rapport and build trust. And much of the earlier stuff we were talking about here, about the frames, explaining what coaching is, coaching isn't, you're going to do during the building the rapport stage. The next thing is to find out what makes them tick. What motivates people? And people often say to me, oh, there's this theory, there's that theory, the other theory. And I always reply, if you want to know what makes people tick, what motivates them, ask them. Now, the difficulty is if you ask somebody what motivates them and you are their leader, they will probably say things that they think you want to hear, which is not good. So you need to be a bit more subtle than that, but we'll talk about that when we look at each step individually. So, okay, if they're coming, they need help. If you know what motivates them, well, that will be a good factor to be able to get them going. But there are things that are going to stop them achieving what they want to achieve. So what stops them achieving their desired outcome? What is the limiting belief? What is it that that's in the way of them getting what they want? If it wasn't there, they wouldn't be. There's going to be some limiting belief that needs to be sorted out before they can actually sort out what the issue is. More on that later. Now we need to explore the goal. What is it they're after achieving? Find and develop the necessary resources. So how do they find? Do they need to go internally? Do they need to go externally? Do they need to get some lessons? Do they need to do some training? You know, how do they find the resources they need to be able to solve the problem? And maybe, which is the next one, you need to do some teaching of a model or a technique or something that will help them. Again, it doesn't necessarily follow that if you discover they need resources that they need to go out of the organisation to find it. Maybe you have the skills, and as you develop as a coach, you will be able to help and develop and show them different techniques to help them get through whatever it is that they need to get their goal. So once you've got all the information, once you know how to solve it, you're probably caught with some choices, and you need to make a selection of what is it, which route you're going to go. You may have 2 or 3 different routes. Now you've got to decide which route they're going to go on. And then they set their goals. You know, this is what we're going to do, and there's going to be a time frame on it, and how's that going to work, and when will you know, and how will you measure that it's successful? And once you've finished that, the final stage of the process is a reorientation back into daily life. Coaching can be quite an intense thing because you are focusing on problems and finding ways of finding solutions. So to be able to have some break at the end, to be able to allow their brains to move into the outer world again is pretty important. Otherwise they go out in a trance. Okay, so let's have a look at each one of those 9 steps, step by step, and see what it is that you need to do. And it's almost like you could sit with this list in front of you and talk through it, and you would be able to coach somebody just by reading the list. But with a little bit more skill that you've already developed in the building rapport, building relationships and being able to influence people, you'll be one step above the average coach. So, step number 1. So we are building rapport. You are explaining the frames we were talking about, and you're having problem-free conversation. So they want help with the problem. And sometimes people's brains are so focused on the problem that they've forgotten what they're good at. So often I will use a word like, well, So I know you'll come to talk about this problem, but I know little about you. Tell me a bit about your career. What were your successes? What were the things you really did that worked and that you're very proud of, and that you know if you wanted to write a CV, you'd put them down? What are you good at? Because what you're searching for is information on their ability to solve problems which they've done before. Somehow or another, at the moment, they don't have the necessary resources for whatever reason. And sometimes even in this very initial stage, people go, oh, yes, I remember how I did that. So to take people away from it and remind them of what is it that they can do. Often, which is another interesting thing, if somebody goes, Robert, can I have some time? Can you give me an hour to do a bit of coaching for me? And I go, well, okay, yeah, but you'll have to wait till next Wednesday because I'm busy, which is often the way. The other thing that you need to find out in the first step is how things have changed. Because having made the step to go and get coaching, they've already got their brain in gear, and things will have changed. And so you may find that they've done a few things that are working, to explore what has been changing and how they've been changing it, and what are they doing already that they're not maybe aware of. So in that first step, you can be finding out more about what they're doing already, and again, we're getting that information that people often lose when they're caught in a problem place. So now, step 2. We're finding out what makes people tick. Pretty important. If you know what makes people tick, then you are well on the way to pointing them in the right direction. Often, I mentioned on that last working for a charity, I was working for a charity, and what had happened was some of the people that had reached the top leadership jobs were really, I don't know, starting to get very demotivated, because what was it that they were originally doing that really turned them on? And it was working for a charity, and what they were doing, they were no longer doing, because they'd kind of got promoted to the top of the organization and had become leaders, but were no longer doing what they wanted to do, and had lost sight of what were the things that motivated them. And so their motivation generally was gradually coming down. And to spend some time, as I did with several of them, saying to them simply, what is important to you about what you do? And get a list of what is important to them. And ask them, why is that so important? And just keep asking them that, and the classic other question, which is, and what else? Once you've got somebody's values, to remind them why they're doing what they're doing, that can be enormously important in the coaching process. Because sometimes we get bogged down with the everyday run-of-the-mill things, and if you are caught at that, then there ain't anywhere you can go but to be reminded of it. And then all of a sudden what they were doing as leaders kind of got back into focus, that what they were doing were empowering other people to do the hands-on bit that they were missing, but creating the environment that other people were being able to do more and be more successful at the hands-on bit. Even though they weren't doing it, it kind of put them back into gear, back into motivation. So to find out what motivates people is very important. Again, you can't just ask what motivates you. Just ask them what's important to you about your job. And they will tell you. And why is that so important? And what else? Simple questions which will give you valuable information, which will lead you next onto the things that they need to change. To find out what is it that's stopping them. There is always something stopping them. Otherwise, they wouldn't be there asking for coaching. So there is a limiting belief. And to understand about limiting beliefs, need to understand a little bit about how we're made up. Interestingly enough, this works very well with the values as well. If you think about it, we live in an environment, and all we ever see of people is their behavior. But underneath the waterline here of this iceberg is an awful lot more going on than we know about. So people have behaviors, and one of the things we're doing in that first session of working out what in the problem-free conversation is what kind of capabilities do they have, or they used in the past that they might be able to use now. So that's sometimes outside of their awareness because it's underneath the waterline. And under the waterline there's values and beliefs. And so with their values and beliefs, the values, we were saying how important that is, and the only way you can really know what people's values are is what are their behaviors. Do their behaviors match their so-called values? So you can only ever measure people's behaviors against their values. But the sticking point we're talking about here is their beliefs. And if there is a limiting belief underneath the waterline that I can't do, I'm not good enough, and all those I can'ts that lurk somewhere underneath the waterline, if there's one of those that's driving the behavior, then there is no way that the behavior will ever turn to the positive. So we need to find out what that is, root it out, change it. Other than that, there's the attitude, identity, and there's that thing beyond yourself. That is the kind of, what is your mission in life? But that is all a little bit deeper than we're going here, because as you see, it's very deep down. So, what are the limiting beliefs? What are the things that are holding them back?